Good evening. Great to have you aboard. This is a big week for two really big cases here on Court TV. We're talking about the George Floyd murder trial. Friday, huge day there. Tomorrow, a big day in Idaho for so-called doomsday cult mom Lori Vallow-Daybell. She's scheduled for a court appearance. Remember last time she was a no-show, waived her appearance. She's got to show up tomorrow. Now, when you think about that case and you think about what happened to those children, JJ and Tylee, and you look at the actions of Chad Daybell, you look at the actions of Lori Vallow-Daybell, and then you think, well, how did these kids die? Who was responsible? And the key to the whole thing may be someone who will never be charged, someone who will never be brought into a courtroom. I'm talking about Lori Vallow's brother, Alex Cox. Tonight, Chanley Painter takes a closer look.
I recognized that it was sent the day after Tylee Ryan was last seen alive, and I became concerned.
September 9th, 2019. Chad Daybell texts his wife Tammy.
Well, I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. While I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times.
It's 11:53 in the morning.
It was longer and more detailed than any of the other messages between Chad and Tammy that were stored on the device.
14 minutes before this text, Alex Cox was on the Daybell property. And prosecutors allege that this message from Chad to Tammy was an ominous cover-up to disguise what was really going on in Chad Daybell's backyard.
We had satellite imagery, we had telephone ping information, we had text message that already allowed us to establish some priority areas of interest on the property.
It began with Alex Cox's movements in the early morning hours of September 9th, 2019. According to the investigators who traced his cell phone data, Alex Cox made a couple of visits to Lori Vallow-Daybell's apartment in Rexburg, Idaho, after returning from Yellowstone National Park with his sister Lori and her children Tylee and JJ.
The location data that I had obtained from the Google account.
Those represent just Alex Cox, is that correct?
Not Alex Cox, but the device belonging to Alex Cox.
Okay.
But his movement becomes suspicious to investigators when he visits Lori's home in the middle of the night. From 2:42 a.m. until 3:47 in the morning of September 9th, the affidavit reads, "This is significant because this is the only time in September he appears to go over to Lori's between midnight and 6 a.m. By 9:21 a.m., Alex Cox, or at least his cell phone, was at the home of Chad Daybell in the backyard near the east end of the Red Barn. For nearly 2.5 hours, his cell pings over the spot of what investigators call the pet cemetery.
The north side of our 10-foot by 10-foot original pet cemetery area, we eventually, the next significant thing is we hit a bone, sticking out of the ground.
There was a melted green bucket that it appeared that the burnt flesh had been placed in. Under the bucket was a partial human skull.
This is the location where investigators would eventually uncover Tylee Ryan's remains. And it's the alleged spot where Chad told his wife he was digging and burning branches that same morning.
Upon reading this text message in which Chad appears to claim to have started a fire, shot and killed a large animal, and buried it on his property, I recognized that it was sent the day after Tylee Ryan was last seen alive.
Leading investigators to believe Tylee died on or about September 9th, 2019.
Amazing police work, right? Absolutely amazing. And you're tracking where Alex Cox is. Early morning hours at Lori Vallow's. That ties those two people together, right? Then in the morning, he goes over to Chad Daybell's place, okay? And then he's texting about what's going on in the backyard. That ties him to Alex Cox. Now, all of a sudden, all three are connected by Alex Cox and his cell phone. Alex Cox, the one who is dead. Unbelievable. Let's bring in our team of legal journalists to take a closer look at this. Ashley Banfield, Court TV special contributor with us. Court TV legal correspondent, Chanley Painter with us, and Court TV anchor, Michael Ayala. Chanley, this is unbelievable. What are we going to call this? The raccoon effect? It seems like this raccoon text message ties everything together and puts Chad Daybell right there with Alex Cox.
It is a huge piece of evidence for the prosecution. That's why they name it as one of the overt acts in the conspiracy charges against Chad Daybell. What the investigators say, first in the probable cause affidavit, is that this text message stood out for several reasons. First of all, raccoons are nocturnal animals, rarely out during the day. And also, there were no raccoon remains found in the pet cemetery when they excavated that site in June. But also, as we heard the investigator testify to during the preliminary hearing, is the timing of the text message the day after Tylee Ryan is last seen alive, given Alex Cox's cell phone pings. But also, the investigator testified to the amount of text messages between Tammy and Chad, and this one definitely stood out because it was longer and more detailed than all of the other text messages between his wife during the time period that the investigator studied, Vinny.
You know, Ashley, this is such an incredibly, I think, ironic piece of evidence, right? Because prosecutors saying this is what ties it all together, whereas the argument would be that Chad Daybell was trying to cover his tracks with his wife, Tammy, who's still alive at this moment, right? And trying to explain some activity in the backyard. And by explaining the activity to Tammy, he is now, according to prosecutors and their theory, implicating himself in this entire thing.
Well, he would have had to tell Tammy something, right? Because a big old mound of dirt in the backyard, freshly dug, that's going to elicit some questions. And I'm also surprised to hear, maybe I'm not surprised to hear, that the text messages between his darling wife Tammy and him were always short and to the point. Clearly he had other things on his mind, and there wasn't a text saying, I'm busy stuffing another cult girl. But I have to say that I think the thing that ties Lori and Chad to the raccoon and to the backyard, and clearly to what was buried in the backyard, is that phone call that Chad made to Lori in jail when the police showed up, and the very odd way they spoke to one another. They're out there digging, they're out there searching in the backyard, and then he took off. Now, if he'd really buried a raccoon in the backyard, why would he have taken off? Why would he have asked Lori to call a lawyer? What did it have to do with Lori? Nothing. Lori would not have had to call a lawyer if they were digging in the backyard where he buried a raccoon. Lori would have to call a lawyer, though, if they were digging in the backyard where he buried two of her children.
Michael, you know, I'm thinking back to when I first started at Court TV many years ago. You were there. This type of evidence was just kind of starting, right? Where you could pinpoint people's locations based on cell phones. Now it is so incredibly precise, but will it be persuasive to a jury?
You know, I think it will, Vinny. I mean, as you said, it's so incredibly impressive, and it's something that's relatively new, that they're able to sort of track the movements of these folks. And then Alex Cobb, you know, being so connected to everyone in this case, and, you know, his background, Chad Daybell being so diabolical, these texts, as Chanley said, the type of text, it was very different than what he normally would text to his wife. The time of the text, so close to when the pings hit at his Alex Cobb's phone, pinged at the property. So again, this is extremely persuasive as far as I'm concerned. And you know, Ashley, I agree with you. We like minds, you know, because when I look back at that phone call between the two of them, there's a point there where he mentions they're digging on the property, and just the way he says it, there's a little suspect there. But then, you know, Lori holds her tongue. It's as if she knows that maybe he's trying to get her to say something, and then she doesn't speak, and she says, oh, okay. You know, so the whole thing just sort of meshes together to create a very compelling story.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the bad guy in this trial is going to be Alex Cox. Yeah. I mean, prosecutors will do a number on him to a certain extent, but I think the defense is going to attack him as well. Chanley, Alex Cox is going to be the biggest figure that never shows up in the courtroom.
You're exactly right. If you look at the affidavit, just go back and listen to the preliminary hearing. A lot of evidence revolves around Uncle Alex Cox, his cell phone pings, his communications with all of the parties. He's even listed as a co-conspirator in the complaint and the affidavit in this case. And we know somewhat about him, but let's take back and take a listen to Melanie Gibb. She was actually asked about Alex Cox several times on cross-examination by John Pryor. Let's take a little bit of a listen to that.
How would you describe your relationship with Alex Cox?
A friend, friendly with each other.
How would you describe the relationship based on the knowledge that you have of between Alex Cox and Lori Vallow?
I'm sorry, the relationship I
Yeah.
have or they have?
They have, the two of them.
Oh, those two together? They were good friends and siblings to each other. They got along really well.
So when you describe they have a close relationship, it was a little more than close. They were extremely close, weren't they?
I would say yes.
Okay.
John Pryor goes on to cross Melanie Gibb about Alex following Lori all over the country, moving here and there with her, including Rexburg, Idaho, saying they're strongly bonded together. And then you remember in the preliminary hearing when we listened to the audio of Lori Vallow in the body cam of the welfare check at her apartment right there, she talks about Alex being there at her apartment and that he's her protector.
Ashley, I mean, we got a great indication from that preliminary hearing about how Chad Daybell and his attorney are going to deal with Alex Cox. And I think they're going to put Alex and Lori together as the team. They are like one. They're acting in unison, and he's kind of the outsider. I'm married. I've got my own family, and these people have their own little thing going on here. And it's a little strange. It's a little scary.
Except for all those visits, that Alex Cox made to his house before all of this. Plenty of times that Chad Daybell and Alex Cox are together in one way or another. And I do agree with you in one sense, though, Vinny, because, Alex Cox seemed to be the person that would either stun gun or shoot people who got in Lori Vallow's way, ex-husbands in particular. But who's to say that children weren't getting in the way of her life with Chad? And along came Uncle Alex, dedicated and loving brother, who may have yet again done away with people who were standing in the way of what Lori wanted in life. I think that the Uncle Alex aspect of it all is so fascinating. But I also think that plenty of times cabals have gone into banks and one of the robbers has been shot dead and the other ones still get convicted. So it doesn't really matter that Alex Cox looms large as one of the big bad boogeymen that will never walk into the court. He'll be in that courtroom in video, in text messages, in body cams, stuff that we haven't seen yet.
Absolutely. All right, a lot more to get to in the program.